Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Witkoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. You know, New York City has some very interesting individuals who have changed, who have grown their careers from starting in accounting and a variety of things. And today, I'm very fortunate to have Fred Gould, the chairman of the board of BRT Realty Trust, the chairman of the board of Gould Investors. There are so many companies, so we're not going to talk about, we'll talk about all the companies in a minute. So Fred, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Michael.
So Fred, you were born in Brooklyn, and you went to public school in Brooklyn, and then you moved to Manhasset.
Correct.
And your father, the late Stewart, was an accountant.
Correct.
And during high school, you decided to go to Lehigh, right?
I did.
How did you decide on Lehigh?
I wanted to go to a modestly small-sized school. Lehigh was one of the choices. I looked into a couple of southern schools and decided that Lehigh was better. One of the reasons is I didn't get accepted at Washington and Lee.
So when you were at Lehigh, what were you doing in the summers?
If you lived in Manhasset as a youngster, you worked in the summers generally. In the summer times, I always had jobs delivering. Even when I went to school, I worked in a florist, and so that in the Christmas time, and they were very busy, I'd come home and deliver flowers for them.
When you graduated college, you graduated as an accountant.
Correct.
And I think one of the things that you had mentioned to me is that one of your father's friends was David Chase.
He was a friend of my best friend's father.
And what happened to David Chase? David Chase was a senior partner at the firm of J.K. Lasser, and for people who were of our vintage will remember that was a very prominent accounting firm which also had the tax book. Everybody knew Lasser because of the income tax course.
Well, J.K. Lasser really was, in those days, the accountants did the tax work, not the lawyers. And they were the prominent accounting firm in tax work. And when I got out of high school, I knew Mr. Chase, David Chase, modestly through my best friend's dad, who was his best friend. And I asked to visit with him, and he invited me over to his home. We lived out in Sands Point then. I spent a couple hours, maybe 2.5 hours with him. And at the end of the meeting, he said to me, Freddie, isn't your father an accountant? And I said, yes. And he said, you should go to work for your father. And I was shattered because I was hopeful he'd offer me a job so I could go ahead and move ahead in tax law. And later on, I met him. As you get older, age doesn't make any difference. You're in the transaction with people. I was in a transaction with him. He took me aside one day and he said, do you ever think back as why I told you that? And I said, no, I was really disappointed that you hadn't offered me an opportunity of joining J.K. Lasser out of college. He said, I always felt you'd be an entrepreneur.
Not an accountant.
And you'd be better off being in with your father. You'll find something to do.
So you graduate, and then you decide to go to law school.
That's correct.
And you went to law school, and you went days and nights, but at that time you went to work with your dad, right?
Went to work with my father, who had a modest-sized accounting practice, specializing in automotive dealers and the men's clothing district primarily.
And that, I think, was the way from the men's clothing district. Your father was involved with some syndications with friends and clients in real estate, which is how the roots of your real estate involvement.
And as an accountant, you worked very hard during the winter because the income taxes had to be due by March 15th in those days. So you worked like crazy in the winter to do your regular accounting work plus the income tax work. Then after March 15th, he and a bunch of his friends would always go to Florida. And he came back and he said, the guys with the best tans sitting at the pool in Florida, when he asked them what business they were in, they were all in real estate. So he figured I should be in the real estate business.
The interesting thing is you were working for your dad, you were going to law school, and then at the age of 26, it's very interesting because you got involved with a public company. I mean, your dad had some businesses and some real estate. You met Arthur Feinstein and you met Abe Camber, the Hungarian.
My dad had always done work with his clients and syndication, things of that nature. He brought people into deals. For example, in Midtown South, what they call Midtown South now, was the men's clothing district. He had a lot of clients who were textile shrinkers, cut and suit people, things of that nature. And he met a gentleman who ran all those buildings downtown, managed them. And so the two of them got together. My dad would put some of his clients who were tenants in these buildings together, and they'd buy the building. This other gentleman would manage them, and they'd own them. And that's how my dad originally got into the industry. And when I joined him, we had some of those smaller properties and some other small properties that he had syndication interests in. And he was a small part of the Abe Camber group, if you will, who syndicated larger transactions. The dominant portion of it was with Bill Zekanoff Sr., who was extremely well known and a very, very, very bright individual. And Zekanoff had some wonderful expressions, one of which I'd rather be operating at 18% than dead at 6%, because he didn't care what he paid for money. He always thought he could do something with the buildings to make them more profitable in the long haul. So this group that I was a small part of at that time did a lot of business with Zekanoff.
Now, what happened, you had told me when we got together that you took the companies and you rolled them up.
What we did is in 1962, we took a number of the small syndications that my dad had, and we rolled them into a company and went to the public arena and raised X number of dollars for an entity that was at that time called Gould Equities, something of that nature. And it was a corporation. It wasn't, they didn't have REITs in those days. But we were able not to pay income taxes as a corporation because we had enough depreciation to shelter. So the distributions were tax-free. And we rolled them up, and the people who bought the original, very small, in those days money was not as many zeros as today. I think the original capitalization was about $10 million. And if someone had put $10 into which is what the initial stock price was, into Gould at that time, through the inertia and the changes, it went from a corporation to a real estate investment trust when it was allowed, and then to what is now a master limited partnership. One share of that would probably be worth about $200 today.
Pretty good appreciation over the years.
Yeah, we were here a long time. It's almost 50 years, Mike. And they would have gotten about $3, $4 a year in dividends, cash distributions.
Now,
so it worked out well.
You mentioned there was a $10 million loan from Talcott?
That's how we originally did the transaction. In order to buy properties to have, when we did the roll-up and then did the public offering, you had to have properties so the public offering would have some substance, and the money raised in the public offering went to pay back James Talcott, which was their original. I think we were the first or second real estate loan they'd ever done.
Now, during that time, you, Arthur Feinstein, Max Camber, and the syndicate and the shareholders, you acquired a number of properties, and some of them you still own, and some of them was land under the Astra Hotel, right, and other properties.
Well, that was all Zekanoff's. We did the Astor Hotel, the Manhattan Hotel. In fact, when Zekanoff went under, our group had to run the Manhattan Hotel.
Explain to me what do you mean the group with Zeckendorf? I mean, Zeckendorf was as I would hate to say, but he was a deal junkie. There was no deal that he didn't want to own. Everything he wanted to own, he was legendary, you know, and he did go under with Webb and Knapp and everything, and Camber had some loans on it because I was reading.
Well, they weren't loans in those days. We would buy the buildings, and he would lease them. And the deal was he'd lease them for a period of time, paying us a certain return, so we'd get the depreciation, our group would get the depreciation. And then at a certain time, he'd buy the building back. So it acted as a loan, but it was really done as a fee and a lease.
Now, besides the legendary Zeckendorf, you guys were also involved with Irving Schneider and Harry Hemsley.
Well, that was subsequent. That's much later. As I started talking to you about before, the uniqueness of our involvement in real property over this period of time was that we played a lot in the public arena. And one of the reasons is when we did the first public company in 1962, we frankly didn't have any money. My dad probably had a net worth of a couple of $100,000, and my net worth was my car and my equity in my house, I think. And so we went public because that's how we were able to be in the industry. And after that, we were one of the early people who dwelled in the public arena.
Is that how you ended up in Michigan? Because, you know, the kid from Brooklyn ended up in...
That's another different story, but the growth of the company came about. We first started to buy some other companies on a friendly basis. We bought two companies early in their career, and then we started to be somewhat knowledgeable in the public arena. And when everybody else in real estate, or most people in real estate, didn't want to buy into public companies that owned real estate. It's a totally different situation today. And so the reason we got involved with Harry Helmsley and Irving Schneider, there was a company called New York Equities, which was public but owned about a million and change square feet of space in the city, owned by basically two families, controlled by two families. Both of the individuals in these two families, one was deceased and the other had some mental problems, and he was in an institution. And his son, who had nothing to do with real estate, was the one running the company. I think together they had about 50%, and because of their disagreements, Irving and Harry were asked to buy 16%. The rest was public. So we liked what we saw there. We wanted to buy it. The only way to buy it was to buy the stock, and there was a detriment to other people bidding on it. So we ended up making a deal to buy the 40 or 50% from the two families. Irving and Harry had a right of first refusal. And so it's a long story, but how we got them to step away from the first refusal is that we got them to join us, and we were able to borrow some money, and it worked out quite well. So
and that's when you bought some of the buildings in Midtown South and Broadway and some other properties.
Yeah, that was Marshall Rose has been my partner since early in the 70s. Marshall is really good in the street. He walked in every neighborhood in the world. And we liked Midtown South, and we were there very, very early. We bought a couple of buildings when they were very cheap. They were men's clothing. Guys cutting suit people were in it. One of the buildings we bought where the carpet company is now on 19th and Broadway was a machine shop downstairs.
Right, ABC Carpet.
ABC Carpet is in it now, but it was a machine shop with blacked out windows when we bought it. So we bought a lot of properties in that area when it was emerging.
And then you bought properties also, 11th Avenue.
We do a lot with the city. We're not afraid of the city as a tenant.
And Federal Express.
Pardon?
You had New York City Parole.
We have a lot of buildings with the city. Some people don't get it with the city because sometimes they don't pay on time, and you're sort of in the banking business. If you want to if they need repair work, you have to do it for them. They pay a little tardy, but we still enjoy a very good relationship with the city, and so we own a number of buildings where the city is the tenant and one where the state is the tenant. The State Parole Board is a tenant of ours on the west side. The city's a tenant of ours in two different buildings in the city, nice size office buildings.
Now, how'd you get involved with BRT?
Well, what happened is that real estate business has ups and downs. Equity isn't always on the ascend. So we always had two operations in our office. One was lending. Whenever we had extra money and there wasn't something to buy, we would make second mortgage loans and high yield loans. We came to a decision in the 70s when things were, let's say, de-accelerating in the real estate industry, that you'd make more money in the debt side than the equity side. Didn't have enough money at the time to do as much as we'd like on the debt side. So we bought stock in BRT, which was a troubled REIT, and we were somewhat adversarial. And we bought the stock, knocked on the door, and said, we'd like to take the company over. You come sort of not uninvited. So it was a little bit complicated, but after a period of time, we took control of the company and put it into a big lending company, and we've had it ever since.
What about One Liberty?
Very similar experience. In One Liberty, we found an REIT which was initially set up as a captive to buy the real property and lease it to Firestone Tire and Rubber. The individual who started the company was a Wall Street type who, as soon as he got the company going, had an altercation with his main tenant, i.e. Firestone, which wasn't a very good idea because it was really done as a captive. The company was going nowhere. He bought some bad properties, I should say. In the meantime, we thought it was undervalued, bought a bunch of stock in it. Again, went through an adversarial relationship, had a fight for control, and we ended up controlling the company. And the first thing we did was make a deal with the Firestone company to take their properties back at a good situation for us.
Yeah.
When we had the last one we did was Entertainment Property Trust, which was a very good company that owned theaters. And we bought a bunch of stock in the theater company when everybody in the world was anti-theaters, but we understood they owned only stadium theaters, only the good ones. So they were making good money in renting the stadium theaters to the exhibitors, but the exhibitors were doing poorly because their bad theaters were losing money. So we did a big study of the industry and we bought a lot of stock in that company. Again, we went and knocked on the door and said we can be helpful. They told us to go jump in the lake. So we had a proxy fight, lost by a little bit, but we liked the industry, went into the industry and bought quite a few motion picture theaters ourselves, and their stock came way back, and we made some good money in their stock.
The banking business.
We're pretty entrepreneurial in that our leasing company, we have a leasing company, and the gentleman who runs Majestic Properties. The gentleman who runs our leasing company often introduces me to people who are leasing space, and one day he was leasing space to a gentleman, and he said, I'd like you to meet the boss, and they walked down the hall and sat in my office. I said to this gentleman, what do you do for a living? And he said, well, I convert mutual savings banks into stock banks. I said, I don't understand what that means. So he explained to me that mutual savings banks are owned by the depositors, and what he did was convert them to stock ownership. So if, for example, a savings bank had a $20 million net worth equity, and they raised $20 million, you'd have $40 million for the $20 million that you raised, which sounded like buying dollar bills for 50 cents. So what was happening in those days is people would make deposits in these banks hoping that they'd be converted. So we started to do that just to make some bucks when they converted. We did that 2 or 3 times, and it worked out very nicely. Then a good acquaintance of mine, who was the CEO of Bayside Fed, was converting and asked us to buy a 10% interest, because you could buy 9.9, excuse me, because he wanted some friendly people involved. So we bought 9.9% of Bayside Fed and just put it as an investment. He was very, David Harold, a very, very good operator. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. Next one came up was Bankers Fed. We bought 5%. The stock, instead of going up, went down when it was first offered. So the president asked me if I would buy some more. So we bought up to 9.9. And then we tried to get involved with them and go on the board, et cetera, and they turned us down. Then the big bad wolf came, tried to buy the bank, and he wanted our vote, et cetera. So they put me on the board, put me on the loan committee. And little did I know that it was a mistake we had made, because their loan portfolio was very poor. And instead of buying dollar bills for 50 cents, we were buying them for $1 and a dime. Not a very good idea. So I went on the board, tried to clean things up. One of my people who ran BRT for us, Izzy Rosenzweig, came down and joined me, and he ran the loan committee. And we took a bank losing $3 million a year. Within 3 or 4 years, we were making $9 million a year. And we sold that bank to Dime Savings. And what we did was found a niche that the major players and even the smaller players weren't playing. And we were the first ones to make first mortgage loans on low-sold co-ops. We didn't care if it was 10, 20, 15%, 20% sold. We viewed it just as a multifamily rental unit. So we were the first ones to really do that, with that niche, we did quite well with it.
Now, the Bank of Great Neck, you were also involved with.
Bank of Great Neck, we just started with a bunch of friends. And when you do a lot of things, you make a lot of mistakes. One of the good things about Bank of Great Neck is that one of the partners in it was John Canis in North Fork Bank. That's why I met John. Well, the negative things is none of us had enough in it to spend the time to work it. So it was just sort of floundering. So I sold my interest to a friend of mine who was one of the original investors. Then they ultimately sold the bank to North Fork. It became part of North Fork.
Now, I was saying to you before, you were born here and then you ended up in Michigan.
There's always negatives in a story. We got a telephone call from a brokerage house, a major brokerage house, saying, why don't you buy control of this company called Vanderbilt Tire and Rubber? So we looked at it, and what they did for a living is they owned the TBAs, tire, battery, and accessory stores, which were run as part of major department stores. If you went to a Macy's store, there was a TBA out front. And they ran those as a sort of like concessionaire, if you will. They gave a piece of the action to the department store, many, many department stores. They got in difficulty. We went out and bought it and tried to make a conglomerate out of it. So you talk about the good stories and the bad stories. That was one of the real difficult times in our lives.
And you and Helene spent, what, 3 years up?
We moved out because what we did is we bought a bunch of other companies in that some having nothing to do with real estate, some having to do with development. Got in big trouble. Moved out to Michigan to see if we could stay alive, so to speak. And we enjoyed Michigan. It was a great place for us to be, met some wonderful people. But the company ended up being a giant failure for us.
Now, you came back, and that's why you said the interesting thing is you always, even though when you'd been in business with Marshall, who was in the city, you kept your office in Long Island.
Well, originally we had an office at 370 Lexington Avenue. We were there for many, many years. But when I came back from Michigan, I really didn't want to do the commuting back and forth. So we took an office in Great Neck, which was close enough to be in the city when you wanted to, and yet close enough to our living accommodation to go back and forth whenever you want.
And you own a couple of properties in Great Neck. You own properties all over the country.
We started to buy more on Long Island. When we were headquartered in Long Island, we ended up owning probably about 5 or 6 office buildings on Long Island. We were a shopping center, a couple other things on Long Island, industrial. Only because I guess we were there and it was easier for us.
Now, you have 2 sons and a daughter who are in the business. The sons are in the business, right?
My youngest son, you know well, is Jeffrey.
He's the president and CEO of BRT.
He's the president and CEO of BRT. It's a business that he likes. He likes being out. He likes talking to people, making loans, et cetera, et cetera. He's been CEO now for, must be 8 years now or something like that.
And then Matthew, your oldest son?
My oldest son, he came in, he was always head of the equity company. He's head of the original company called Gould. And he's made some very good decisions concerning properties that we own. He runs that company quite well. Gould is now not only an owner of real estate, but it's an older owner of stock in these various companies. So it's an owner of real estate and a holding company. And Matt is the CEO of that company.
And do you have a daughter?
My daughter is married to a lovely man, fortunately a very good provider. He's in the investment banking field and has been forever.
And you and Helene have been married, what, 51 years?
50. We married in 1958.
So it'll be 52 years this year.
A long time.
And but one thing that, besides that, you and Helene, and following your father and your father-in-law, you've always given back, always been involved with the State of Israel, Jewish charities, nonprofits, and so on.
Well, philanthropy has been a big part of my life and a very enjoyable part of my life. I am a believer that doing well is really terrific, but doing good makes you feel better. My father had an expression. My father was a very wise man. You should give with warm hands. Giving it in your will doesn't give you any pleasure. So we've always had a strong involvement in some interesting charities with a real dominant part of it in the Middle East.
And right now, I remember there's a new involvement the last couple of years in the Middle East.
For a long period of time, I was the
Seeds of Peace.
I was co-chairman of the board with, not co-chairman, excuse me, vice chairman of the board with John for many years. Then when he passed away, I became chairman of the board for a number of years. And what that is an organization that fosters coexistence amongst Israelis and Arabs. And it's worthwhile, because the only chance of success in the Middle East, stop killing each other, is to coexist. And so we spent a long time with that organization. All my children, many of my children went to the camp, my grandchildren, excuse me, went to the camp. Then I got involved now, because Helene and I have been very involved in the city of Haifa. And we built a library and a community center there, and we know the mayor quite well, both the prior mayor and the current mayor. And we were asked to help the Maccabi Haifa Football Club, which is one of the dominant professional football. Their soccer, we call it soccer, one of the dominant professional soccer teams in Israel, to help them expand their youth program. Their youth program takes in kids from 8 to 18 of all religions: Christians, Jews, Druze, Bedouins, Arabs. They all play together.
But Haifa has always been that type of city also.
Haifa is the city where
the most cohesive relationship has always been.
Even in the 48 war, the Haifa Arabs never left.
Yeah, no question.
And it's still a commingled city.
So, in conclusion, I'd say for the kid who grew up in Brooklyn, who didn't really know anything about real estate, you've been more than a builder of New York. You've been a builder of the country, and I'd like to thank you for being here again today.
You're very kind.
Thank you.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Wickoff Group.